It's 5:30. It's all the meeting before. Hang on, let me find the one that I actually need. Here we go. Shall we? 5:30, call to order. Just for future reference, do you mind putting everybody's name into the roll call like we do on those board meetings?
Sure, they're on the meeting minutes too.
No, that's where I'm gonna take it from.
Okay.
But I usually go put it in there. For roll call, trustee Carmen Gasparo. Here. James Aarons. Here. Rosa Stone. Here. Jim Walker. No. Paulette Bernadette. Yeah. Everybody. There we go. You weren't here last week. That's why. That's true. Karen Jansen. And
I think I'm supposed to be on there, or am I not?
you're not on the planning commission.
I thought, okay. I think
I think you're just a guest.
public again.
Yeah.
I'm very public. Okay.
We have any citizen comment? That would be you. Any comment?
I might have some stuff later. Would you recognize me later?
I will. How's that?
Yeah, as it,
Since you're a trustee.
it's
Are
with
you
it.
guys aware, Charlie is our newest trustee? Just so you're aware, he's been attending like all of our meetings for everything, getting up to speed. He was on the board a few years ago. I'm not
4
sure
years ago.
how many,
For
but
3 years.
so he's catching up. He's been attending obviously the board meetings, but all the committee meetings. So, and he was at the plan meeting last week too. You missed him because you were here. But no worries. So anyways, okay, first thing, let's approve the minutes from the January 13th meeting.
Make a motion for January 13th meeting.
Okay. Motion passes. Review, discussion, and potential recommendation to the village board to adopt draft chapter 37 shoreline wetland floodplain zoning. And this is one that we were looking at last week, going, oh, we need a lot. Which this is where Jeff comes in. Up there in the corner, I can see you, Jeff.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So the short introduction is the shoreline wetland zoning ordinance that you see in front of you is taken verbatim from the previous zoning ordinance. So prior to adopting the current zoning ordinance, the Village of Wind Point zoning ordinance included the shoreline regulations. And generally that's not a great thing. Although they both have the word zoning, they are very, very different regulations. Zoning ordinances, conventional zoning ordinances exist under one set of state enabling statutes, and they deal with the use of land and setbacks and how big a building can be and all that kind of stuff. Shoreline zoning exists under something called NR 115. It's a DNR requirement. So putting them together, although it seems okay, is not okay. So all I did was take all of the language from the previous zoning ordinance and reconstruct a shoreline wetland floodplain ordinance. And that's what we have before you. There is very, very little bordering on no, how can I say this? Options for you as a plan commission or the village board to actually change it. It's very, very rigidly governed by statute. There's very little flexibility in there. Now, there are some exceptions, and one that has been discussed a little bit recently is the setback from the ordinary high water mark of a navigable water. Under NR 115.05, which is the state statute, that minimum setback must be 75 feet per structures. So whether it's Lake Michigan or a tiny little navigable stream in the backyard, you can't put a structure within 75 feet of it. There are exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's pretty strong. In the previous zoning ordinance, including the previous shoreline zoning requirements, the Village of Wind Point established a 100-foot setback. So basically, you tacked on additional 25 feet. Now, you do not have the authority to reduce it below the minimum of 75, but you do have the authority to increase it. The question, of course, is whether you still want to. So if you as a plan commission and eventually the village board believe there is benefit throughout the village for having that extra 25 feet of no development in terms of water quality protection, then you'd want to keep it where it is. If on the other hand, you feel that the state standards are sufficient, then you can reduce it to 75. I'll stop and listen now.
Okay, and this is actually germane with some, is that wise to do?
It's a policy decision. So I don't know if wisdom comes into play. Generally, the communities that I've found that have have established the 100-foot setback are communities along Lake Michigan, to a lesser degree along the Mississippi River. But those are the only ones I've really bumped into in terms of, with the exception of an isolated community here or there. I believe the city of Lake Geneva requires a 100-foot or 125-foot setback from Geneva Lake. So it tends to be those communities that have higher property values, higher incomes, really, really value water quality and the natural environment and want to do everything they can to ensure its protection. I don't mean that to put the burden on you. You as a village already put this burden on yourself by establishing the extra 25-foot setback. So the question, of course, is whether to remove it or not.
So, no, like 9. I just feel like probably people wiser than me put that in there for a reason. The president recognizes Mr.
Public.
Manning.
John Q.
Well, I have to recognize
No, I understand.
you might have some knowledge of this. I don't know if you had any.
Personally.
Okay.
So when I built my garage, we were less than 100 feet, and I obtained a conditional use for building that garage. Would that still be an option? I had a choice of either taking out some of the apple trees in my orchard, or alternatively building maybe 80 feet from Lake Michigan high water. So the question is can you obtain a conditional use based on good reasons? So that would be the question.
But that's really a question for Jeff.
Exactly.
Sure. So the short answer is no. And the more nuanced short answer is that the conditional use permit that you were issued is called an ultra vires approval. It's an unlawful approval. So the village did not have the legal authority to grant that conditional use. And the reason
then arrest that guy. I remember who it is.
I think we need.
And the reason is by state law, conditional use must be specifically listed in the ordinance. You cannot just have this vague term called conditional use. There would have to be something in the ordinance that said, as a listed conditional use, locating an accessory structure inside the minimum 100-foot setback with under these specific terms or conditions. And then if you as an applicant applied for a CUP for that particular condition or conditional use, you would have to meet those conditions in order for it to be granted. You may notice, Plan Commission members, on page 4 and page, where are you, Rested Red font? There's a couple pages that have bright red font, page 4 and page 6, where it says, note, conditional uses must be specifically listed. So the current ordinance had this thing called conditional uses, and I'm sure that's how your garage was approved. And the fact that it was approved by the village board protects it. So your garage is protected, even though the village board did not have the authority to do it. Once it did it, it protects that garage as a legal use. Plan Commission can't do that. Building inspector, zoning administrator don't have that authority. So if you want to create exceptions, for, let's say, within 75 feet to 100 feet, within that 25-foot area. You certainly can. We just have to come up with a list of what those specific exceptions would be, because those are the only exceptions that would exist. Now, keep in mind, Wisconsin had something called 2017 Wisconsin Act 67. We talked about that quite a bit when we were going through the zoning ordinance. It was the law in late November 2017 that changed requirements for conditional uses, which basically means a conditional use permit cannot be denied. So if you create a conditional use for something within that 100-foot minimum requirement, it's not like you can deny it. You must grant it, so long as the applicant agrees to whatever the terms are. And those terms have to be specified in the ordinance itself, which essentially makes it silly, right? It's called a conditional use, but it can't be denied, and you can't come up with any terms other than the terms that are listed in the ordinance. If you do that, then I would just recommend going to 75 feet, because it's going to be allowed for every one of those things. The one exception, of course, is you can specify the conditional use. In other words, you can say it's perfectly acceptable for a gazebo, but not for an enclosed structure, or it's perfectly acceptable for a detached accessory structure smaller than 500 square feet, but no principal structures, no single family dwellings, for instance. So you do have that allowance. The question, of course, is, with the exception of the apple tree orchard situation, why would, and I don't mean this in a negative, I'm not suggesting what, but why would the village want to allow something that it otherwise does not want to allow? And if the reason is because there are occasional exceptions out there, that's not a legitimate reason. It's called spot zoning. It's not doing something for the benefit of one property owner is not illegal, but it's basically unethical, and it's really just wrong. So I hope that helps. So my recommendation would be, if you as a plan commission have an idea of some of the conditions that you'd agree to, I don't know, raised bed garden or something, which wouldn't count anyway, because those are transitory structures. They can be picked up and moved. If you have an idea of what kind of structures you would allow to essentially violate the shoreline wetland ordinance, we just need to put that list of structures as conditional uses on pages 4 and 6. If we do not have a list of, or if we do not have an idea of what those structures are, my recommendation is to delete conditional uses on pages 4 and 6, and then we can revisit it at another time. My concern right now is, because the current zoning ordinance repealed and recreated the previous zoning ordinance, the Village of Wind Point right now does not have a shoreline zoning ordinance in place, and we need one in place. So I would rather adopt this tonight or yesterday and then fix anything that we have to fix after the fact, just so we have an ordinance in place. And just so you know, it's my fault. The last meeting, we should have had this conversation, and I got stuck in another meeting and I couldn't get out of it. So my apologies for that.
So basically, the only thing change-wise on this that we have sitting in front of us tonight would be if we want to put structures in that could be less than 100 square feet or 100 feet from the shoreline under the conditional use.
But
Other
no,
than that, adopt this as is.
correct, less than 100 feet, but no less than 75 feet, correct. And then if the answer is we don't have an idea, or we don't want to do that, or we might want to do that, but we're not sure how to proceed yet because we want to put together a list and consider all that, then the recommendation would be to delete the 2 places where conditional uses are listed, and then make the recommendation to the village board to adopt. Because again, we can do a text amendment at any point in the future. It's a simple thing, class 2 notice, fixing anything that we have to address. I get a little nervous when an ordinance as important as shoreline zoning or anything else isn't in place because of a technicality. We would probably be able to fight it in court successfully, but I'd rather not put one of my clients at that kind of risk.
John Q. Public.
Not your problem.
I think that the gazebo is a reasonable use of something less than 75 feet. right?
And I'm thinking the same thing, but I'm also thinking what Jeff is saying, that adopt now and then come back and go, okay, these are the types of things we will allow to.
Can this be amended on the fly
Yeah, this is
tonight?
just what he said. We could do a text amendment with the proper second-class notice and put in what the conditional uses would be. A garden shed, a gazebo.
Garden shed is
Well, I'm just,
not within my thoughts,
okay, well,
you know.
good thing you're not on the plan commission. But but we can discuss the type of things with Jeff's guidance of what could be under conditional use.
Perfect.
But we don't have to do that right now. We could go ahead and adopt this, get it to the village board, and maybe at our next meeting, we can come up with, unless you want to do that part tonight.
I mean, I could certainly put together a list of some of the structures that would potentially be compatible within that 25-foot area. And then you as a plan commission would look at it and highlight the ones you want, redline the ones that you don't.
And that would be good to get like what you commonly see, I guess, in other municipalities. And then I can send it out to the committee if that works, Jeff.
Sure. And the short answer is, so transitory accessory structures are, things that effectively one or two people could walk over and pick up and move without a whole lot of effort. So raised bed gardens, bird houses, just a picnic table, even something like a pergola could meet that definition if it wasn't on a concrete pad fixed to the ground, right? So I'll put together a list of those things. The zoning ordinance itself actually has a definition of some things that are called transitory accessory structures. That would be a good point to start.
And then all the bolded words are things what you just added here for clarification.
I'm scrolling through right now just to make sure that's correct, but I did a little bit of wordsmithing in here. Right, so I think in that first section, introduction, that's the only part where I kind of threw some, I don't know, supporting information in that wasn't in the previous. Actually, I take that back. It was in the previous ordinance, but it was in the zoning ordinance proper part of it. So this ordinance has to have that as well, the establishing language.
Okay. And I noticed on page 16, which is page 20 of the packet, under historic structure means any structure, and in bold says which meets one of the following criteria. And I'm assuming that it only, it didn't have the part in bold prior. Which could
That
mean that it had to meet all of them.
Right. I think it's correct. I think I highlighted that just to make sure, and thanks for pointing that out. I forgot about that section. I wanted to make sure that it was the previous plan commission village board's intent, and certainly the current plan commission village board's intent to say if it meets any one of these, it can be classified as a historic structure, as opposed to it must meet all of these. That was that's the reason that part is bolded.
Okay. I just want to clarify that part.
So if I may, heading.
Yeah, that was really all that was there besides what you would put in at the.
So this is the list of transitory accessory structures in the current zoning ordinance. Structures no larger than 120 square feet in area. And again, not recommending this as verbatim putting it in, but as a starting point. Pergolas, not including decks, trellises, fences and walls, children's playhouses, play apparatus, swing sets, sandboxes, and the like. Raised bed gardens, beehives, enclosures for chickens, dog enclosures, swimming or wading pools with a maximum wall height of 24 inches that may be readily disassembled for storage, and other structures deemed to be substantially the same by the Plan Commission. So it gives you a starting point for discussion. And if you're reading at home, that is on page 99 of the zoning ordinance.
Oh, in the zoning ordinances, not
The
in.
zoning proper, not the shoreline ordinance.
Okay, that's why I couldn't find it.
That's correct. That's why you couldn't find it.
And you know, is there, in the beginning, here, let me see, is there reference back to the zoning ordinances for definitions and whatnot?
There is not, and there should not. So a shoreline ordinance should stand alone as a zoning ordinance does. Cross-referencing between ordinances is generally not a great thing to do.
Okay, I just meant for the definitions.
Right, so any definitions that from the zoning ordinance that would apply in the shoreline zone, you could plug in, but keep in mind, the zoning ordinance applies in the shoreline zone.
Okay,
So it's not like you can review and approve something in the shoreline zone just within the shoreline ordinance. There's still the general zoning ordinance that has to come into play.
I just am thinking in terms of sometimes how people will read these and they don't necessarily understand that both apply. And if they're looking for the definition, it's like, well, does this apply to this? That's the only reason I was.
Right. So if you notice, if you go through that list of definitions beginning on page 14, almost everything is specific to shorelands. Now, there are some examples of something that isn't, like, for instance, the definition of a building or structure, and that's, again, verbatim taken from chapter 36. But for the most part, all this stuff is specific to this piece of land called the shoreland zone. And that shoreland zone, with some exceptions, extends 75 feet from the ordinary high water mark. For principal structures on Lake Michigan, the actual shoreline zone can extend 1,000 feet, but it's not a zoning prohibition. It's just a consideration for review, for lack of a better phrase. So really, we're talking about 75-foot mark under NR 115 and 100 feet. Again, we retain that within chapter 37. But still, anybody who wants to build anything within that area still has to go through the zoning process. An application for site plan review and,
Right.
ARB approval, it's an ARB requirement. Building permit, if that's appropriate.
Well, I am going to give my opinion here. I do not think that we should change the what do you call it? From the setback from 100 to 75, because we are completely built up. Everybody else in the village had to comply with this, and there was a reason they put 100 feet in there. And we have what, maybe one lot, and possibly a couple, because there's a couple lots that have been sold privately. And to change this now, I just believe that they put this in there for a reason, and I'm not going to change it. So I'm good with it being 100 feet. Anybody else have an opinion before we take a vote?
I agree.
Accept an offer.
Some more information than I had.
100 feet.
Oh, are you talking about the one on White House Drive?
One on,
It's more information than I had. Anyways, do I have a motion? I have a motion to adopt.
I make a motion to adopt the chapter 37 shoreline wetland floodplain.
If I can jump in before anybody seconds that and request a question as to whether the conditional use permit issue, the conditional uses can be removed from this version as part of your motion.
Just remove that verbiage.
Just
Conditional
remove
uses.
conditional uses on pages 4 and 6, and we can certainly.
we can revisit it later.
Yeah, revisit it later.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
That to the board.
Okay. I make a motion to accept chapter 37 shoreline wetland floodplain zoning with removal of the two conditional uses words on page 4 and 6.
Second,
I'll say.
Peter,
Aye.
opposed? Abstain? Okay, motion passes. This will go to the board for approval. With the conditional use. Under.
Travis, I'll prepare a pre-public hearing draft of chapter 37. That's one that you can bring to village board. And then if the village board agrees to move forward, just schedule the public hearing.
Okay, sounds good.
And if you want, I can do the, hearing notice and that kind of stuff too.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
Yes, sir.
About the property too? Are you doing that? Travis is,
Yeah, Jeff will go over the documents relating to short-term rental.
all right, so we're on number 6, discussion of short-term rental ordinance and attached documents.
Well, I'll try my best not to bore you with the details, but the short answer here is back in 2011 or 2012, the former Governor Scott Walker and the legislature approved, I think it was called Act 59, if I remember correctly. Basically, it said any dwelling unit in the state of Wisconsin, stress that, any dwelling unit, apartment, condo, farmhouse, single-family dwelling, duplex, anything can be used for short-term rental purposes, and no municipality can prohibit that use. So anybody who anybody who owns a dwelling unit or anybody who owns rental units can turn those into a short-term rental, basically Airbnb or Vrbo or any other uses at any time. But local governments do have the ability to regulate that use. Can't prohibit it, but you can set standards. We did include short-term rentals in the zoning ordinance because short-term rental is a use, and because the way zoning statutes work, if a use is not listed, it's specifically prohibited. And since we don't have the authority to preempt state law by prohibiting something that state law allows, we had to have it in the zoning ordinance. So now that it's in the zoning ordinance, anybody can do a short-term rental in the village of Wind Point. What we don't have right now is a short-term rental ordinance that governs that use. And if you don't have a license that you can issue, you don't have a license that you can revoke. So if you have somebody who is becoming a problem in terms of short-term rentals to adjoining neighbors or abutting neighbors or whatever the case may be, having a license gives you the ability to revoke that license. And that you can do. And once a license is revoked, the right to a short-term rental is revoked with it, unless they comply with whatever the requirements are to reapply and be issued another short-term rental license. So the ordinance itself is about 2 pages long. It takes about, 45 minutes for me to write one. There'll be a lot of discretion in there for the village to decide how many days a year it's allowed. You can set a maximum of 180 days within a given calendar year. You can prohibit short-term rentals that are less than 7 days in length. You don't have to. These are all discretionary options for the village. It is, I hope I don't sound patronizing, but it can be a really, really significant problem. The reason is, well, there's lots of problems with Airbnb and Vrbo, but the main problems with short-term rentals is you have people who bought a house in Wind Point at probably not an insignificant amount of money, expecting to live in a residential neighborhood, and then they find that they're living next door to a hotel because it's rented out 180 days a year for every event and every, whatever. So having the ability to revoke that license issue a license gives you the ability to regulate the use. That doesn't exist right now. Right now, the use is unimpeded right under state law. So that's what a short-term rental ordinance does. The documents that I provide give you the basics, including there's one that's from DATCAP, if I remember right, it has kind of a bluish font to it or something. It basically says, if you're thinking about running a short-term rental out of your home, it is a hotel. It is a lodging unit, meaning you can collect room taxes from every single Airbnb, every single Vrbo that's in the community, if you so choose. I'm not qualified to write that, but certainly Attorney Larson would be able to prepare that for you. All right, I guess that's probably enough for the intro anyway, and I'll just address any questions that you may have.
So just for your information, this has been a hot topic at the Racine County, county governmental, whatever. Some communities do have a real issue with RVOs and Airbnbs because there's the regulation it's really tough to regulate. The fact that we don't have any type of ordinance, we do need one. The health department, Racine County Health Department, purchased a computer program that will go through and it looks for ads in all the social media and newspapers and everything for Airbnbs, VRBOs, short-term rentals, everything like that. I think the only one they said that they could not do is Facebook. So Facebook Marketplace ads and stuff. And so they can come up with the addresses for where there's a rental. And they gave that information to the different villages. At the time that they did this, we apparently had none, just as an FYI. We do long-term rentals, people leave their home. And I don't know that we actually have people that leave for the winter that has people stay in their homes. I don't know that we do. They may have a family member or a friend. I don't know if they rent it out. And if it may be an agreement. So it would be something that you would find on VRBO. If it's, my cousin's gonna come stay here for 6 months and they're gonna pay me, $100 a month. Well, we wouldn't see the tax revenue from that because we didn't know that. So, and they're supposed to register when they rent their homes. That is.
DATCAP requires that. There's a
Yeah.
state statute that requires it, but unfortunately Airbnb, Vrbo, and other rentals don't inform their constituents, clients, however you want to describe them, of those requirements. So,
Well, but if I'm a snowbird and I'm gonna let my cousin live in my house for the 4 months that I'm down in Florida, and I'm gonna charge him, and I didn't tell the village, they're not gonna know any different. They'll never collect a dime off me and they're not gonna know that I'm,
that's
gone.
correct.
So
I should have clarified this too. Everybody that owns a single family dwelling in the village of Wind Point can rent that out to anybody for a year without any approval, right? There's no prohibition against somebody doing a long-term rental of a single family dwelling in any community. That's why there are so many. So in Appleton, where I am, the estimate is that 65% of the homes sold in the last 3 years were purchased by hedge funds. They're used as rentals. They've turned single family dwellings into rentals. Right now I'm showing 3 houses that are in Wind Point on Airbnb. And
Okay.
I'm sure there's
And like I said, when we got the information, which was probably 4 or 5 months ago, they said they didn't come up with anything. But
right.
so it's been.
Yeah, it's very, very transitory. People put it up and then take it down and that kind of thing. And they
Right.
generally put it up during specific seasons. So up here, everybody's maybe familiar, the Packers are hosting the NFL draft in April. So I've had calls about, can I rent out my pop-up camper in my backyard for Airbnb? We have many calls like that over the course of the last couple of weeks, and it's just going to get insane as April approaches. But so if I'm heading south for 6 months or however much time, and my grandchild or my uncle or my sister wants to stay in the house, that's perfectly fine. And if they want to compensate me, that's perfectly fine. If I put it on the market, if I advertise it and I market the fact that it's a rental, that's where it crosses the line. So if it's just something between family members and friends, that does not fall under these requirements. It's only if it's marketed online as a short-term rental.
So a person who would be considered a guest would not qualify.
Absolutely correct. And even if that guest it gets a little bit iffy when you're talking about short-term rentals where the owner occupier is in the house when the room is being rented out. If it's just a room It's still a short-term rental and it still has to fall under the provisions. If it crosses the line into a meal, then it's a bed and breakfast, and that's a whole different set of requirements that have to be followed. And those have to be listed. That's a specific use in a zoning ordinance that would have to be included. So you can't have a bed and breakfast until it's allowable in the zoning ordinance and it complies with, I forgot what the statute is, chapter 17 HHS or something that says for a B&B you have to do this. So again, the regulation of a short-term rental is very, very easy. It's generally a relatively inexpensive license. Most of my clients charge $25 or $50, and that's good forever. Some of my clients will have an annual fee or an annual renewal. That's entirely up to the village. Once issued, again, the strength of a license is that it can be revoked. Health department inspection is generally required. And there are lots of stipulations like, there have to be clean towels, there have to be extra clean sheets. There has to be somebody within 15 minutes of the Airbnb if there's any issue. So if somebody is a snowbird and they head south, there has to be someone in Wind Point that is designated as the party to come address any problems that might exist in that house. If
I have
they're
a question.
6 months or more, that gets more into a long-term rental, and that doesn't fall under short-term rental ordinance.
Jeff, does this deal with just consecutive days? Suppose I rent it out like someone, so that would add up to over 100 days a year.
Great
That-
question. Yeah, great question. That the village has the discretion to determine whether it's consecutive or in total. The vast majority of communities and certainly Wisconsin Towns Association and League of Wisconsin Municipalities recommend cumulative, just because it creates so much of a loophole if you don't. But again, if you do adopt an ordinance, the question is, will you allow essentially weekend rentals? Maybe there's the Park and Rec group, PRFC, whatever the Park Recreation Facilities Committee. They were talking about the lighthouse climbs and some of the events you have. Something like that is of a significant nature for people who are lighthouse fanatics, and there are lots of those people. So having an Airbnb rental for 3 days is something that would draw more people in than if you set a minimum of 7, right? Because what happens when you do set the minimum of 7, what happens is the property owner doesn't really charge for the other 4 days, right? It's listed as a 7-day rental. It cannot be rented out during any of those 7 days until they've elapsed, but they only charge the applicant for the actual days they're staying. So it becomes a 3-day or 2-day rental anyway. So again, there's always loopholes.
Did you had a question? Yeah,
It's Mr. Public again.
Yes, Mr. Doctor.
I did take time to look at the city of Racine's applicable ordinances, and they seem pretty comprehensive. And I would suggest we reread those and bring those up, but it deals with safety, health. I can't share a bathroom with a guest, for example. I mean, it really combs it out pretty
Yeah,
fine.
and there's a lot of I've looked at different communities and they've gotten they have to be, because
Yeah.
that's the only way they can control them. It has to come down to literally the number of bathrooms and sewage and the number of people in the room.
Yeah, you can't have, if you want to doll up the room with a quilt, it has to be washable. So, no quilts. The sheets have to have a 12-inch margin on them. So it goes into some fine detail, but it would be better than trying to make our own wheel, is to take that wheel.
Yeah, no, I agree, because
Yeah,
I have looked, there's a lot of different communities that have put them together.
And if a homeowner had a thought, well, maybe I'll rent this out for a few weekends, for him to comply, he has a series of, I think that from my count, 3 not quite trivial inspections that he has to go through before it's approved in the city of Racine. But there's probably 12 to 14 pages that cover short-term rentals
Yep.
in the city. It seemed comprehensive to me.
Right. So the better ordinances out there, and I'm not familiar with Racine's, but I've written a couple that approach 20 pages. The better ones don't just focus on the interior of the structure, but the exterior as well. So again, if you're going to have, I don't know, people coming into Ashwaubenon or Green Bay for a Packer game, you know that they're not coming in to be quiet and sedentary and watch the game on the TV, right? They're there to enjoy everything there is to enjoy about the Stadium District and Titletown and Lambeau Field and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things you can do is establish essentially site plan requirements for Airbnbs. The entirety of the property must be screened by fencing, vegetation, or a combination thereof. No external lighting is allowed that spills over the site. There must be sufficient parking on site, either in an enclosed or in the driveway, to accommodate the maximum number of guests that would be allowed. There's so many different things that can be regulated. So there, a starting point of the rudimentary ordinance that the Towns Association prepared, that I think the League of Wisconsin Municipalities kind of co-opted about 10 years ago, is a 2.5-page document that gets you something to establish the statutory right, the legal right to regulate. But I do agree with Mr. Public that something more comprehensive is probably better, more appropriate for a community like the Village of Wind Point, whereas something less so would be, perfectly fine for a little town on a lake in, Pierce County or someplace. No disrespect to Pierce County, by the way.
Well, the town of Norway has a huge issue with Airbnbs. They've got an aging population. A lot of the families have homes right on the lake out there. Parents die, kids have the house, they don't want to live there, so they turn it into an Airbnb. And so every weekend in the summertime, there's parties, they're renting it out. They don't know who's coming in, and it's become a real nightmare for them out there. So the little lakes out in Podunk, Wisconsin, actually is where a lot of the problems are. So they need a really highly regulatory ordinances. I don't know what they have, but I know that's kind of what started the whole discussion at the RCICC. What do we do for health? But I agree that we need, if we can regulate it, we need to regulate it down to the point where we welcome you to our community, but we live here and we want you to abide by our rules and not become a huge disruption to our community. You can't outlaw them. They're totally legal, but you can regulate.
The most common criteria for revocation of a license is 2 strikes and you're out. Some communities have a little bit more latitude than that, but that seems to be the one. So there's a warning issued for non-compliance with short-term rentals that goes out. And then if there's a second warning within a certain period of time, if there's a second incident within a certain period of time, the license is revoked for a specific period of time. And then the applicant has to wait that time out before they can reapply. So again, there's a lot of discretion for the village. It can be as permissive or restrictive as you want it to be, but more importantly, it can be crafted to do what you need it to do.
I think we need one. Apparently we do, because we have some that are showing up on Airbnb. I'm not aware of what homes in the area. So I'm not really sure what shall we commission you to write us an ordinance, a detailed ordinance that would make them, so you don't even know when you're driving by that it's an Airbnb. I mean, that's what we would like to be part of our neighborhoods. Well, I didn't even know. Guys, you're so quiet tonight.
I would recommend.
Except for John Q. Public.
I have a opinion on everything.
That is true, that is true, but I do agree that we need to write an ordinance, we need an ordinance, and I think it should be detailed,
Right.
village expects.
Like,
Interestingly, there was two on Airbnb that are clearly in Wind Point. One that's close enough that I'm not sure. Verbo has 2 listed. And then a whole bunch in North Bay.
Well, and one thing I've noticed and because when I've got to look, they'll say Wind Point, but then when you get a little,
It says Racine.
right, and it's not actually in Wind Point.
Right.
The area,
They borrow the name.
yeah, they borrow the name.
Prestige.
Yeah. 'Cause,
Often landowners won't include their address.
you're right, unless you go book it.
Yep, you have to essentially get an approved contract for the date or tentatively approved with the deposit and then let you know where it is. And they do that for a reason because their community doesn't, if they don't want anybody in their community to know that they've turned their house into a vacation rental.
Yeah, but if there's pictures, you can usually tell by the pictures, especially if you've been in the house.
So the best, like you had mentioned, Racine, and there's some others that Jeff had mentioned, don't reinvent the wheel.
I think the Racine, again, if I can have permission, I think the Racine ordinances are very comprehensive. It goes into great detail. It provides that homeowner with a checklist that he has to comply with before he goes to inspection, right? And his health department inspection. And additionally, I think it's some income.
Right, because they will have to, the Racine County Health Department will have to inspect. That's part of the deal. And then
Yep.
they have to pay all those fees. I
Yeah.
forget what they charge. It's quite a bit. It's like-
It's not trivial. But for example, yeah, you have to have an opening access egress.
Yeah,
normal,
no, it's
But if
all-
you have an opening window, it has to have a screen on it. Right? That's into fine detail. So I don't know.
My son.
Yeah, again, I think the point of not having to reinvent the wheel, the original wheel was invented by, again, Towns Association of League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and it was a very, very basic wheel, right? Wooden spokes, and that was about it. That was back in 2013, 2012, 2011, whenever. They've become far more robust. So if you look at the the city of Racine's short-term rental ordinance, and you're comfortable with it, let's use that as a starting point for discussion. Take a peek at it and see what their offsite stuff is. That seems to be where I've found to be the limitations on many ordinances. Everybody does a really good, I shouldn't say everybody, most communities do a really good job of regulating the actual structure and how it's used because, again, there's so many standards out there now. It's the mitigation of offsite impacts that are the ones that concern me the most because the use of the structure, that's a health issue and it's not important. But from a planning and zoning standpoint, it's the impact on neighbors that I'm most concerned about, right?
Mhm.
Is there
I agree.
when you looked at, I'm asking Mr. Public, when you look at, is there any for non-compliance in that?
I didn't get that deep. I bounced around in there and I wanted to know what the fees were because I'd like to know what, this is income for the village. And so mitigation of trouble with neighbors, very important. But equally important is its income.
Yeah, it is. And then that's another thing that, it's a revenue stream with having a hotel tax, which is something.
That's the key right there. So the village cannot use application fees as an income generator. That's a violation of law. The application fee itself must be grounded in the actual cost of reviewing, accepting, reviewing, distributing, and deciding upon the application. On the other hand, the hotel fees, those can be used for all different kinds of things. They can be used for parks, they can be used for roads, because again, these are essentially there are negative impacts associated with lodging. There are lots of positive, of course, but strain on strain on infrastructure, strain on utilities, all that kind of thing. So if you're looking at it as a tool to potentially enhance budgets associated with some of that stuff, that would be the hotel room tax that you'd want to pursue. And I'm pretty sure Racine County has a county-wide room tax, and you could sign up and be part of that. But again, depending upon what we do next, we can certainly look into the details, get more information.
Yeah, we have to check it and see about like for a wind point one too.
I'm surprised we have any Airbnb. That's
Well, like I said, they did they ran that program a few months ago and they said we did not, but they couldn't find the ones on Facebook. The ones I found on Airbnb and VRBO, a lot of them said Wind Point, but when I got down into the details, they weren't actually in Wind Point.
Yeah, I don't think
They were in Caledonia. They were
Right.
North
That
Bay.
could very well
They
be.
have them in Caledonia for sure.
Yeah.
They have Airbnb houses in Caledonia.
Yeah.
I was kind of doing this on
That's
the
state.
fly. I didn't put a lot of effort into it, so that absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
And as far as rentals, we have quite a few rentals.
right, and that's a different
That's
thing.
a
They
different
have to
story.
register with the village when they rent their home.
Yeah.
And then so we know how to contact the owner and that type of thing.
But my son has, he has an apartment or a condo downtown, and he started renting it as an Airbnb when the Republican. It's a lot of work. He's got a cleaning lady comes in, they gotta wash the sheets, they gotta wash the towels, they gotta wash everything. You gotta check in, check out, and then the occupant who stayed there gives them a review. Mhm. It's a tough.
2 tablespoons per gallon of Clorox. That's how specific it is for sanitation for bathrooms and kitchens.
At this point, I don't know that we do, I don't think we need a motion, but do we?
No, it's just a discussion.
Yeah,
Yep.
just have, I think what we should go look at, Racine's ordinances, but go look at other communities. Especially, go look at what Milwaukee has. You know, it's a much larger community. Look what Kenosha has. I find Kenosha has a lot of good stuff. Their website's set up really well too. So see what other communities have and see what they have within their ordinances that you like and you'd like to see.
Yeah. I think more information is better than less information for sure. But I agree that focusing your initial review on the Racine one would be appropriate, given that there's so much crossover between Racine County and how they regulate the city of Racine, or how Racine does, and how they would regulate in Wind Point. So using a tool that is well known next door is often better than a better tool that's not well known next door. That's something from.
Oh, no, I don't disagree. I agree, use the Racine one, but sometimes you'll find things in other communities that it's like, oh, they didn't have that in theirs, but that would be
Absolutely.
beneficial. Is where, the starting point, and then just to look and see, and of course you'll see the commonalities too.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll find the external, how many parking spots, can you have a fire, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Because, I heard a lot of complaints about what was going on in Raleigh. I felt so bad for them. I'm like, we have a bigger lake, but we don't have bigger those kind of problems so far.
I think that you should make a point of, list some of those things that you've seen as problems so that we know of them.
Well, I can call Gene and say, and like I said, we're a different community,
Of course.
and their big issue came with the residents passed away and the kids didn't want the house, so they turned them into Airbnbs, and they didn't have the ordinances in place. And I don't know what they have in place. I know they have something. And I don't know how it is going now, but it was a real mess there for a couple of years.
But for us to just be cognizant of the problems that they had would help us avoid them.
Right, well.
I think if you
big
can
part of
imagine
it-
the worst possible neighbors, you'll have them.
Yeah, well.
They really are.
When they would rent it to they would say, you know, I've gotta have 3 people, and then they have a party and there's 30 people there for the whole weekend. That's the kind of problems they were having. So, you know, and we have ordinances that would cover that, just in general terms, not necessarily for an Airbnb,
Right.
but it's, yeah, you know, there's smoking pot and stuff. That's not legal in Wisconsin. You know, might be legal where you're from, but it's not here. And so, anyways, so I would, everybody look at Racine ordinances and then, you know, if you feel the urge, you know, look at communities around us to see what they have that might apply.
Yeah, I would take a peek at communities that are cohorts with the village. So, you know, Door County would be a nice choice. Lake Geneva would be a nice choice. Maybe Oconomowoc, places that have, you know, kind of similar assets to what Wind Point has, Port Washington, et cetera.
Okay, and number 7, discussion on the Village of Wind Point Comprehensive Plan.
Okay, so the current comprehensive plan for the Village of Wind Point was adopted in November of 2009. Wind Point was party to the Racine County Multi-Jurisdictional Plan, which included, I'm pretty sure, all of the municipalities in Racine County. Maybe not all of them, but certainly the most. This was the first generation of comp plans established post Wisconsin Smart Growth Law that was signed into law in '99 by Governor Thompson. That first round included a lot of grants, particularly for communities that agreed to a multi-jurisdictional planning process. So Sewer PAC worked with Racine County and then all the communities to develop that plan. If I remember correctly, it was about a 2.5, 3-year process, and it was adopted in 2009. The issue is Wisconsin's comprehensive planning law requires that a comprehensive plan be updated at least once every 10 years. And that was 2019, and we're now at 2025. Why is that a potential problem? Well, Wisconsin's comprehensive planning law has something called a consistency requirement. And essentially what it says is any municipality that administers a zoning ordinance, a subdivision ordinance, or an official map must do so consistent with an adopted comprehensive plan. So you have a comprehensive plan, but because the statute requires that it be updated at least once every 10 years, do you really have a comprehensive plan? And if you don't have a comprehensive plan, do you actually have the authority to administer zoning regulations? Now, this has not been adjudicated yet in the courts. As I mentioned to the Finance Committee, there have been a number of cases that almost made it to the court, but then the municipalities settled before it went that far. If somebody were to be denied something in the zoning, under the zoning regulations in the Village of Wind Point, and they were savvy enough to know anything about the comprehensive planning law, or if they had an attorney that was so savvy, they could challenge the village's authority because there hasn't been an adopted ordinance, an updated comp plan. Now, one of the things that buys us time is the fact that it's already been on the agenda of the Finance Committee, and now tonight it's on the agenda of the Plan Commission. So if somebody did pose a challenge to the village, a legal challenge, the response would be, and this would come from Attorney Larson, would be the village recognizes the fact that the comp plan expiration date has elapsed, and we're in the process of updating the comp plan now. We're acting in good faith to do so. So we do have time now because of the 2 meetings and because it's on the agenda of those 2 meetings. The village of, the Racine County and Sewer PAC, we've talked, we've communicated with them. Travis has communicated directly. I've communicated well. And it looks like they're looking at late 2025 to start the process. Generally, I would anticipate a 2-year process, once again, maybe 3. So you're looking at something like 2027 to 2028 before you have an adopted comp plan. Now, in a community like Wind Point, that's not as scary as it would be if you have a community that still has lots of vacant developable land. Because Wind Point is mostly built out, it mitigates to a degree the risk. But it doesn't mitigate the risk, again, for that savvy attorney who decides to push back because his client or her client couldn't put up a fence in the backyard. So the proposal before you is an addendum to the plan. And that's generally what people who do what I do are doing now. Instead of creating the 300 or 400 page boat anchors that we did back in the early 2010s, we're creating these much more narrowly focused, leaner documents that are called addendums or supplements. So it would not replace the current plan. It would be in addition to addendum, right? The existing plan. Probably 40 to 50 pages long. Instead of taking 2 to 3 years, it'll take 6 to 9 months. Instead of $25,000 to $30,000, it'll be, something like $4,000, possibly less under some terms I'll talk about in a moment. The proposal you have before you, if you look on page 6 of the proposal, I'm not sure where it is in your packet, you'll see the table that's entitled Proposed Timeline and Budget. And then in the middle of that table, there's a section called Draft Plan, and you'll see the 9 elements of comprehensive planning law: issues and opportunities, housing, transportation, et cetera. So those are the functional elements of a comp plan. The rest of the costs that you'll see here are not reducible, right? We can't reduce them beyond what those costs are because that's what it costs to do that. But for these costs in that middle part of the plan, this presumes a full update of the current plan, meaning a full focus on housing and a full focus on transportation, a full focus on economic development. Now, because the village of Wind Point has limited commercial development, it's probably not tremendously beneficial to spend 4 hours on that as opposed to maybe 1 or 2. So instead of 376, it might be 188, right? That's your decision as a plan commission. Well, it's your recommendation as plan commission, village board decision. So those numbers in that right column that lead up to or tally up to 3854, that's very, very flexible depending upon what you want. And what I mean by that is there's 2 types of comprehensive plans. There are operative documents and compliance documents. So an operative document is when you jump in and you say, this is what we need in this community right now to address all of our land use issues. The compliance document is, this is what we need to make sure we have a check in the box that we updated our plan. Both of those are options, right? I'm not judging. That's a policy decision. If you choose to go with a compliance document, the cost drops considerably, right? It drops down to $1,500 to $2,200, somewhere in that range. And that would mean updating, first of all, to comply with the update requirement, you'd have to notify all the intergovernmental units. So every abutting community, Racine County, Sewer PAC, DNR, DOA, all the school districts, that kind of stuff. You'd have to have a public hearing at the end before adoption. You have to develop a public participation plan that says, this is how we provided opportunities for the public to engage in this process. You have to update the demographic data. And then you have to review every chapter to decide whether or not a change is necessary. And that's the key part, because I suspect if you were to go into that 600-page behemoth that Racine County created, first of all, it's going to take you a little bit of time to try to find housing for Wind Point because it was all built up as a countywide plan. It didn't do a superb job of segregating everything out by municipality. But when you find it, you look at it, and I wouldn't be surprised if you said, something, it hasn't changed that much since 2009. I do know that more families have moved in, as I understand it. So that does change things a bit. Certainly when it comes to, parks and recreation, the more children you have, it's a different kind of outdoor recreation need. It's different utilities, different transportation systems and stuff. But the numbers here are not what I'm recommending you approve. What I'm saying is if you approve this plan as is, we do everything necessary to comply fully with what an update would be. If you do less than that, you can go all the way down to just making sure you comply with the minimum requirements for an update. And then finally, as you may know, the Village of Sturtevant is one of my clients as well. I'm the zoning administrator there. They're in the same boat, right? Their plan was adopted in 2009. What I did is inform Travis and informed Amanda Gain, the administrator in Sturtevant, that if both communities do decide to move forward and they do so concurrently, I'll reduce the cost by $940. And that's because the vast majority of the work associated with collecting that demographic data and building the issues and opportunities chapter, all that kind of stuff, I'd have to do it all for one community anyway, right? Because I have to do it for Wind Point, but it has to include Racine and Caledonia and Mount Pleasant and Sturtevant and all that kind of stuff. So if I'm doing it for one and I have two clients, it just reduces the cost that way. So once again, I'll try to stop talking for a minute and address whatever questions you may have.
Travis, which one did we approve at the PFIC?
None of them. You just allowed that the plan commission come back to you guys about what the recommendation would be.
Right, but which one did we?
There wasn't any recommendation. It was basically saying whatever the plan commission decides to keep in this middle box or focus on, and then update the plan if necessary, proposal, and then send it back to the PFIC committee.
Because I want to say, was it the update that made more sense? You're over there going, yes.
I'm just nodding my head.
Well, I want to say that that's what I got out of the meeting yesterday, was that the update made more sense than the compliance.
Like updating.
Doing the more, I agree that was.
Doing the more comprehensive. Wait, I'm
What-
sorry, what did you say, Jeff?
I think you're correct, President McCullough. That was the comment I remember was if we're going to do this. So the question that one member asked, I think it might have been Trustee Lopnow, but I'm not positive. I think the question was, whatever we do, aren't we just going to have to do it again when Racine County updates? And my response is no. Once your plan is adopted, Racine County must incorporate your plan into their plan. It's not the other way around. The nice thing about the comprehensive planning law, this doesn't happen very often in Wisconsin. It was a very bottom-up law. Local government made the decisions, not the county, not the region. So if the village moves forward, whatever that plan is, whatever the resulting document is, must be incorporated into the Racine County plan when they update it beginning in 2025 and, hopefully adopting sooner than later. Yeah, I think that. So
There was some consensus that might as well update it now instead of waiting.
Right.
That was the consensus of the.
Because at some point, if we didn't do it, we'd end up having to pay for it again. And it just made more sense to update it now,
Let it be ours
and
kind
then
of.
we'd be done. So,
So what's the reason? Update purpose compliance?
because
More
compliance
unique
is
to-
like the bare minimum, but we probably have to redo it anyways.
Okay. Now might
You
have to do
update it,
anyway.
we're done. Here's our, incorporated into the plan, and we're good for another, what?
10 years.
You know, and the way we're doing things, 15. That's what.
I would not recommend that.
And it's, this is our baby. This is, we decide what's the best. And I believe it doesn't go back to the board until it's done, right?
So that's again a good point. So as I mentioned to the Finance Committee, there are very few statutes regulating what a plan commission does. There are laws establishing, how a plan commission is formed, how many members, compliance with open records and open meetings law, that kind of stuff. But one of the few exceptions to that is by statute, comprehensive planning law, it is the plan commission that is the shepherd of the plan, of a comprehensive plan. Its adoption, its amendment, and its implementation. However, it's the chief elected officials, the village board, that opens the door to the process and then adopts the plan. So the plan commission cannot decide we're going to update the comp plan. That's the village board's decision. But once the village board decides that, it's the plan commission that does all the work. And then when you get to the very end of the process, this is up to the village board. It could be the plan commission that hosts the public hearing, or the village board, but it is the village board that adopts subsequent to a recommendation from the plan commission. So yeah, that's how it lays out. Excuse me.
So we need to pick which way we want to go, and then the board will approve.
Or
But-
not. Right.
Well, if say we want to update.
Correct.
And
Correct.
it's basically-
You would make a recommendation to the village board and the village board would either agree with it or modify
Yea or
it.
nay. If they agree, then it comes back to us and then we start the process.
Yes, ma'am.
And if we make a recommendation, they say, no, we're happy. And then, boom, that's where it stops.
And we can all kick our feet up and not worry about it for another 15 years.
So if we, I just want to be clear here, you can tell that I'm tired. Okay. So what we have here as far as this budget goes, this is for on the timeline of budget. Is this for the update?
Yes.
Right, so the total, if you were, and obviously you're not gonna do that, if you were to adopt this tonight, the total cost would be $9,418. If you were to look at that 3854 in draft plan, there are opportunities to reduce that easily by half, if not 2/3, depending upon again how much of the scope you want this plan to encompass. In terms of the land use maps, they're a little bit less expensive than Ben, my mapping consultant, does. And the main reason is he just put together the zoning maps for the village. So he's more familiar. He has all the data. He doesn't need to get that. You can also reduce the cost in the meetings. So you don't have to have a community engagement session. You don't have to have a community survey. You could just do this as, an informal starting with the plan commission. That's perfectly acceptable. If you as a committee believe that there's kind of a general comfort level with the direction the community is going, that takes away the argument for having a survey or argument for having the community engagement session. So right there, you'd save about $1,500, $1,400. So again, there's lots of places within here that costs can be reduced. The 9418 is, we love it, we want all of this. I'm not suggesting, nor do I want you to think that that's the best option. It's just
Well, because
Luxury
we
others.
are pretty much built up, but there's not a whole lot of changes to be made here. So I believe that we should glean things out that would be redundant. Chances of there being any change from any previous plan. Our zoning hasn't changed if you go look at it. But based on your recommendation, I mean, I'm all for taking your recommendation because you know this better than I do and anybody else's.
Well, I neglected to mention one other thing too. If you decide, and again, I strongly encourage you to think about this. If you decide to reduce the scope of this effort, and then the village board approves it, and we start the process, and we get into it, and you decide, ooh, we need to spend a little bit more time on this. No problem. We just spend a little bit more time on it, right? It doesn't, we amend the agreement, whatever. We just move forward. So you don't have to make a decision that you're locked into. The reason consultants like myself tend to put the higher number as the proposal is because if you do a lower number, sometimes your client still has the expectation that they're, buying a Lexus for the price of a Toyota. So bad analogy, but that's probably the best way to visualize my argument here.
Especially the price of Toyotas these days.
You would like, what I'd be happy to do is go through this with my own thoughts on where there can be cost savings, as in, a starting point for discussion. And then you can look at that and have a better idea of what the actual cost would be. I suspect it'll probably be somewhere around 7, maybe high 6 if you take a lot of stuff out. But cutting $2,500 should not be an issue again with the build your win point.
These are just estimates, like you say, right?
I would think of it not so much as an estimate as a menu. It's a la carte. You're picking what you want. So right now, if you pick the housing element as proposed, it costs $564. But if you're looking at a reduced housing element, because the community is essentially completely built out, that could very easily be 188, 2 hours of my time, as opposed to 6 hours of my time.
My question on estimate is because you don't really know at this stage how much it's going to actually cost.
Well, if the plan commission makes a recommendation, the village board agrees to it, that number will not be exceeded. I will
okay.
never, ever
Okay.
exceed the number
But
unless
it could be lower too, right?
Yeah, that's what he was
Okay.
just saying.
cost, it could be lower if I end up being able to do something faster than I anticipated. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm pretty good at knowing how much time it's going to take to do this kind of stuff.
Of course.
The only way the number will go up is if you as a plan commission request more services, right? You want something more than what's provided. But it's a great question. I would say the numbers that you agree on will almost certainly end up being the number.
Oh, perfect.
It's theoretically possible that I think it's going to take me 2 years and only takes me 45 minutes. But again, I've written 55 of these, maybe 60 of these things. You kind of get a pretty good fix on how much time it takes to do this.
Yes.
So you, for like instance, you couldn't approve kind of like the plan, like the started then, and then, for instance, if the plan commission decided they didn't want to spend so much time, that amount went lower down then, or like, are we landlocked in that number then, that 9,000? Or as we get things going, for instance, they say, well, we only want to do 20 minutes on housing, and then that number continues to go, or do you have to have that answer like now?
I need no answers now. I need an answer at some point in the future saying this is what we want to proceed with. Can you reduce it over the scope of the process? Not really, because it's not like a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 thing. It's more like step 1 and 7 and 9 are started, and then you back up to do step 2 and 5, and then you go off, and so it's not a purely linear process. What I mean by that is there will be a lot of demographic data associated specifically with housing or specifically with income and employment and education. Now, if I jump into that and I do a robust demographic foundation for housing and economic development, and then the plan commission says, yeah, something, we don't really want to update our housing chapter, I would have spent all your money on, I see where I'm going.
Yeah. I don't know, sometimes like, you get a contract and it says not to exceed, and then if you don't pick or choose some things during that time, I don't know if it was like this, but no, that makes sense now that you
Right.
explained that part.
So I don't actually do contracts. I do planning services agreements, and it's not just a synonym or a euphemism. Planning services agreements are much more flexible, and anybody can stop it at any time for any reason. What I can say is I have never and will never exceed the cost, even if it means I underestimated the time. That's not that you would never be billed for that. The only additions would be if you ask for more meetings, if meetings last longer than 2 hours, if you decide, wow, there's something new happened and we really want to expand our transportation system so we can build transporters and spaceports or something, right? That's the only situation. Again, that would be a decision that you would make. You need to make them. You need this chapter to be more robust.
Yeah, part of it is that we haven't seen the plan that's in the boat anchor. And so,
Travis, you should probably make sure they have a copy of that. Don't read it all. It'll terrify you. And I assure you, whatever the process is that you decide on is not going to be anything like that one.
and it's not, you know, part of it is just not knowing what we are purchasing, what we're getting. And I mean, I love information. I love to learn about my community. And this looks like I'm going to get all the information, but am I going to get information overload? Is it going to be more than I need? Or is it going to meet all the requirements, you know, that I'm going to need? Is just as a consumer, but also as a government official and as the village that, you know, that they need for applying for things.
As Travis knows, I'm fond of using the term "a picture's worth 1,000 words," right? Travis, are you able to allow me to share my screen?
Sure.
All right, bear with me for a moment, please. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
All right, so this is your 657-page comprehensive plan. 657. And I'm just going to start scrolling. I mean, going through this is like reading Japanese stereo instructions from the 1970s. There's a little bit of color and maps, but it is a whole bunch of insane black and white tables, data, maps that don't mean anything to anybody, certainly don't apply to the village of Wind Point. And now I'm going to go really fast, so bear with me and try not to look too close, you'll get vertigo. So anyways, you go through all of this, and you have to find the tables where you'll find the village of Wind Point. So for instance, in terms of alternative employment projections for communities in Racine County, and you want to know what the employment projections are for Wind Point, you would find that in table 12-9 on page 250. So that aside, let me get rid of that for a moment. I'll just show you an example of a recent plan that I've done. It's not an analog to what would be done for the village of Wind Point, but it just gives you a sense of what this looks like. So this one is 108 pages long. And the main reason it's 108 pages long is the town of Polk in Washington County is experiencing significant development pressure, and they're primarily an agricultural community. So I'll just scroll through this and you'll get an idea of what one of my plans look like before you get through all this tech stuff.
I don't know if you can see, but the Racine County plan is still on that page. That's all we can see.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me see how I.
Jeff,
No, that was the page that he showed. It just, he tried to get rid of it, but it didn't go away.
Can I ask a brief question?
This one, you see this one now?
Yep.
I'm sorry, was that a yes?
Yep.
Yes.
I'm just going to scroll through this for a minute. And again, you'll get a sense of what an addendum looks like. And I suspect your addendum would be half this size. So somewhere in the 50 pages range. What you're going to see is much less data heavy stuff and more visuals, more graphics, simple, easily understood tables. You know, if you want to know what the projected population is for the town of Polk, you don't have to scroll to page 572. When you get into housing, you'll have lots of information in different kinds of housing. So housing for seniors, manufactured housing, multi-generational housing, condominiums, duplexes, quadplexes, accessory dwelling units. So again, it's a very visual oriented plan as opposed to what you saw previously. So I'll just scroll through to the end and then I can close this and we can talk more. So your plan would be something akin to this. It would look different because I would create a different plan for you than I did for other communities, but the gist of it would be the same. Now, the interesting part of the implementation, your implementation chapter, I think was almost 40 pages long. The implementation chapter in this, I'm sorry, not chapter, the implementation table was almost 40 pages long. In Polk, the implementation table is coming up. Not a full page. So what you have is these very, very specific tasks that are not 20 years in the future, in most cases, not even 10 years in the future. It's a 5-year plan because nobody's smart enough to project what's going to happen 10 years out. Nobody predicted the Apple iPhone in 2007, yet it completely transformed everything about our life. Nobody predicted the Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers crash in 2017. Nobody predicted, well, not too many people predicted a global pandemic. These things happen. And when you have a 20-year plan that's forecasted out, it doesn't make any sense at all. What you want is a 20-year thinking plan. You're thinking about the future, and then you develop a plan that goes up 5 years. Then you update it 10 years later, or 5 years later, or at any time. So anyways, I probably belabored that more than I needed to, too.
Well, you said a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yes, ma'am.
So when I go onto the Racine website, they've got a box for taxes, a box for GIS, a box for recreation, a box for whatever. And that's how I find anything. It took me maybe 30 minutes to locate how to find a GIS map. But I found it.
Right.
So now but every time they make a change, then it's like, okay, now where did it go? You know, but what I like about the Racine is that if I'm doing something in Caledonia, if I'm doing something in Wind Point, I can just go to Racine.
Yep, that's the Racine County Orthophotography, the map book.
That's what I like about it.
Yep.
But they're getting,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Huh?
go ahead.
so they're getting a little bit better because they've got, like you said, a picture with
Yep.
with a
So you can go to the planning and zoning viewer, the floodplain viewer, or the tax parcel search, or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, the community websites, excuse me, GIS websites for municipalities have improved just immeasurably over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. So that if you want to know how big your parcel is, and I mean, it's all so easy. That's not what a comprehensive plan is, though. No,
Okay.
the future land use of the comprehensive plan and the actual document would be posted at some point on the village's website. So anybody who goes to the Village of Wind Point website, you'd have whether it's a top banner or scroll or drop downs, menus or whatever, you'd be able to click on comp plan and it would immediately pop up another menu. And there'd be current land use map, future land use map, the document itself, or you can break it down into sections, the housing chapter, the issues and opportunities chapter, the results of the community survey, all that stuff can be segregated out. And again, it's all about, just as we discussed with the zoning ordinance, it's all about improving user friendliness, usability, making it easy for people to navigate into it and out of it. Because when it gets difficult, that's when people start to question, well, is this difficult because it has to be difficult, or is it difficult because there's something that they don't want me to find easily, right? And whether there's legitimate concern there is irrelevant. There is that perception. Code is not complicated because it's, somebody's trying to make it complicated. It's complicated because it's the tax code. It's complicated. You could, do a flat tax or something and make it simple, but then there are different complications. So when it comes to comp plans and zoning ordinances, things like that, when it comes to zoning ordinances, they are inherently complicated because they are a law. A comp plan is a guidance document. You want it to be friendly and easy to understand. You want it to be colorful and, something that somebody can pick up and look at and say, oh, hey, I didn't know that. Nobody does that with the zoning ordinance. Nobody, reads the zoning ordinance over dinner. So people like me.
Some of us have to.
I think if you're on the planning commission.
I have a quickie.
The president recognizes.
So we've discussed an update, which I believe is synonymous with a compliance, which Jeff will provide an addendum to our current plan. And that's the a la carte method. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So that the POC plan that I showed you, that is the addendum to their still existing previous plan. the previous plan becomes a reference document. It's still there. There's still information that's important, but anything that's included in the addendum that is replicated, I'm sorry, not replicated, that's not the right word. Anything in the addendum that replaces something that was in the original plan is the primary thing. So the future land use map in the addendum preempts or replaces the future land use map in the reference. But all that data in the reference document about how many kids there are in the school district in every single grade, that stuff is still there. How many schools there are, how many cemeteries there are. I suspect almost none of that will have changed in the Village of Wind Point. There might be more students at Prairie School or less students, but not like twice as many or half as many, right? So in a community like Wind Point, it just does not make any sense to do these robust, full-on comprehensive plans anymore. If you're a community that's experiencing development pressure and 50% of your land base is ag, yeah, you need to have a plan to deal with development so you're not chasing it, right? So you're guiding it. Wind Point's, you're not in that position anymore. You're looking at maintaining and enhancing the things that make your community special, and that's what this addendum should be. Now, does that mean you can do it for $94 in housing? I don't know, maybe. You know, we just went through the zoning ordinance process and you have accessory dwelling units and things like that to talk about, courtyard cottages and other things. But again, with a footprint that's mostly built out, you know, your painting is complete. And there's a little work around the edges perhaps, but not full scale changes.
My question has more to do with what we're calling these things.
This
So
would, this would be an addendum to the 2009 comprehensive plan.
and that brings us into compliance. We use that word also. Somebody said compliance.
Correct. Whether you do a standalone plan that completely supplants the previous, whether you do a bare minimum, just updating the 3 or 4 things that you have to, or somewhere in between, all of that would meet the compliance requirement. It's just the more of it, the more of it you do, it moves more towards the operative plan, something that has a function and an intention and a purpose, as opposed to just making sure there's a check in the compliance box.
And so it was your recommendation, or we should strongly consider an addendum to
PFIC's
meet compliance.
recommendation
I'm sorry?
It was the PFIC's recommendation to do the update with the addendum.
We didn't vote on it. There was no vote on it, but
No, but that
Yeah.
was the consensus.
they bounced it to you.
No, just to be clear, whether you call it addendum or supplementary plan or update plan, those are essentially semantics, right?
Oh, okay.
Suggesting what you're not going to do is a full-on update. In other words, you're not going to try to recreate what that 657 pages did. You're saying, you know something, we put a lot of work into that. Much of that work is still valid 16 years later. But there are things that have to be updated. The situation has changed from an economic standpoint or a housing cost standpoint, education, whatever. So that's what this addendum does. It's just some communities actually don't do these at all. They do something called poster plans. City of Madison, their most recent update was a 4 or 5 year update of their previous update, and it's called a poster plan. And they have like 10 posters. That's their plan. If you go to Madison, you look up comprehensive plan, there's the housing poster. There's the intergovernmental poster, right? That's just the format. It's the process is what's important for you as a plan commission to decide. But the reason I like an addendum is it's intuitive. People don't look at a poster and it doesn't convey legitimacy, right? You know, I love that poster back there, but it's not the same as going to Aspen Winter Jazz Festival. When you have a document, there's more legitimacy to it. You can pick it up, you can turn the pages, that kind of thing. Hopefully not 600 pages of legitimacy.
So do we need a vote?
No, this was a discussion again, and I think, Jeff, if I remember correctly, you just said kind of a while ago that you would kind of pick and choose and revamp the plan to bring it back again. So what you think is best for us then?
is he gonna bring it to us or is it gonna go to the board? Cause we kind of agree.
It keeps coming to the plan commission until the plan commission is ready to say, this is the one that we want to proceed with, and then you'd bring it to the board.
Okay, so does it go to the board for just approval for the funds? Or does it not go to the board until we say, here's the plan that we want you to approve?
Got it. Good question. I apologize if I wasn't clear. Right now, we're not at the point where we're moving forward with the plan. Right now, we're looking at what it is that we want to consider. So
Okay.
what I'll do is I'll prepare an amended proposal that will focus primarily on opportunities to reduce the cost in the 9 chapter element section, and potentially the community survey and community engagement session. So those are areas where costs could be effectively eliminated, not so much reduced, because an engagement session is 2 hours of prep, 2 hours of travel, 2.5 hours of travel, and 2 hours of meeting. I can't magically get there in less time, nor can I magically facilitate the meeting in less time. So those are either yay or nay. The reason you can consider not doing these is, again, if you feel that the community is comfortable in its current form, but there's some changes that can occur, there doesn't have to be an engagement session. You can just have one plan commission meeting that is called the kickoff meeting. Just be a regular plan commission meeting, and that's the meeting at which we would start this process, as opposed to a big formal, Wingspread Johnson Foundation kind of thing.
Jeff, can I ask you a
I'm always
question?
in favor of, by the way.
Pardon me?
I said I'm always in favor of doing stuff at Wingspread.
I am too. They always have good snacks.
They have great food.
I have a question for the engagement. What type of information would you be seeking at a community engagement?
Right. It's a two-way street. So the first thing is let's call it the first phase of that meeting is explaining what a comp plan is, why communities have to have them, what the benefits are, why Village of Endpoint is actually updating it, that sort of thing. The next step and description of what the elements are and all that kind of stuff. The next step would be essentially a summary of the results of the community survey. So people do like taking surveys, right? I mean, it's just one of those things that we as humans find appealing for whatever reason. I'm not a psychologist, so I won't weigh in there. So if you do choose a survey and engagement session, that would be the next phase. It would be a discussion of the results of the survey. 87% of the population say this and 22% say that. The next phase would be any sort of interactive element, a visioning session, a brainstorming session, whatever the case may be. And then the final phase would be the next steps. So thank you for coming tonight. The next meeting, Plan Commission, this issue will be on this date. Please join us, that sort of thing. So that would be the engagement session. If you take the engagement session out, you can still do the survey. And we'd still have the results of the survey. We just present them at this less formal Plan Commission meeting situation. So if you believe there's going to be incredible interest when you post this notice or when the word spreads that you're gonna have 50 or 60 people in attendance, that room that you're sitting in may not be able to accommodate that many. So that I guess that's the long-winded answer to a simple question. It's not necessary. If you believe the community is essentially happy with where you're at, I don't know that spending $658 on an engagement session is going to provide you $658 of benefit. Maybe not even $100 of benefit, right? Whereas surveys are beneficial if for no other reason than I want to say prophylactic, but not for the reason that's going to come to mind. Surveys tend to reduce the probability of pitchforks and torches when you get into the actual process. Because everybody thinks surveys are about collecting information, which they are, but they're really about conveying information. Don't worry about this. There's nothing scary. These are the things we're talking about, and your opinion matters. Please respond to the survey. Please have your friends and family do the same thing. That's as great a benefit to a survey as the data that we get from it.
Okay. Yeah, it's the survey part that I think is important. Get that I mean, honestly, we have found that nobody comes anyway.
That's right.
Even when there's wine, the community club, oh, we'll have wine. But I think people are very happy with the way the village is being run, so they don't feel it's necessary. And unless there's some hot topic, nobody shows up.
We've had a few of those.
We've had a
Very
few, but
good.
I haven't for a while, and
Keep
you know.
it that way,
Pardon me?
keep it that way.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly, you know, what we try to do is like, please, you know, doing everything, but I think a survey would definitely be worth doing. Because I do believe demographics are changing in the village and priorities might be changing too, of what's important to people. So, but I think we should do one.
What do you include, sir?
That was my next question.
He writes them, not me.
Well, can you give me an example of what you would put in the survey?
Sure. Let me preface that by saying, like the outdoor recreation plan visual preference survey, this would be primarily an online survey. There would be hard copies available at Village Hall. And so anybody who has challenges navigating, you know, survey, well, I don't use SurveyMonkey, I use Google Forms because it's better and it's free. But anybody who doesn't feel comfortable navigating the online world can do it, can fill out a paper copy and submit it. The questions, and generally for a comp plan, there's never, ever more than 50. I don't like more than 40. I think the ideal number is 30, because if they're too long, people start to just start filling in stuff when you get to the last 3 or 4 pages. What are the questions? There are some that are just opinion, like, you know, how do you feel about the Village of Wind Point as a place to live, a place to work, a place to play, that kind of stuff. What types of housing would you favor that aren't currently in existence? What kinds of transportation systems would you like? Are bicycle and pedestrian trails something that would be high up? What I won't be doing is replicating too much of that, because a lot of that's going to be in the actual outdoor recreation plan that we'll be doing as well. So the two can kind of build off each other. But generally that's it. There are questions specific to the 9 elements in land use in general. And then I usually include, you know, something like, if there's one thing that the Village of Wind Point could do that would make your life easier, happier, more, you know, fulfilling, what would that be? Just because that's where you get the fun answers. So that's it. It's simple, something like that. And I prepare a draft, and then in that draft I provide to you. So I'm not going to write a survey and say, this is the survey. That's not the way I work. I'll prepare a draft, I'll give it to you. You'll look it over and you'll say, no, that's a dumb question. Take that out. I'll say, okay. And you'll say, well, why didn't you ask this question? I'll say, okay. And that's what we'll end up with, is a survey that the Plan Commission approves. My drafts, what I hope from a draft is that I get somewhere between, I don't know, 70 to 80% of what you actually want. I think that's a relatively good batting average for me. It's up to you then to carry it through to 100% of what you want.
I'll feel pretty good about this. And
I have to say, Travis and Professor and President McCullough, the two of you must be really tired of hearing my voice.
not at all. I appreciate your knowledge. Yeah, that's why I'm like, okay, it's your show.
I'm going to make a note on my whiteboard to prepare an amendment. So feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
Oh, okay. So our next step is to get a little streamline for the expense of the things that we want. And then I guess at the next meeting is what we'll determine. And then we'll start working on it. A survey would be probably the first thing we want to look at.
Yep, that's generally the first thing. From my end, the first thing is data collection, because before I do the survey, I want to know how, you know, what's changed. But then once I have that demographic data, and I mean, there's a lot, right? It's all the census stuff, it's Department of Workforce Development, it's American Community Survey. There's a lot of information out there, and I'll collect all of it. Again, depending upon what you as a plan commission decide in terms of the scope of the plan. I should be able to have a revised proposal to you possibly by the end of this week, more likely early next week. And I'll get it to Travis. He can forward it to you each individually. And what I would ask you to do if you want to think of this as homework is each one of you look it over after having this discussion so that when you get back together again, you can have an informed discussion and make a decision on it. If any of you have any questions at all about the comp plan, about the process, please don't hesitate to contact me. Email tends to work a little bit better. I can usually respond better because I don't have to set aside a time for a call. And sometimes I do that after hours. And more importantly, I can have a more nuanced response because I'm not talking off the cuff. I can kind of think about it and put something together. When it comes to recommendations, however, that has to be you as a plan commission, not you as an individual member. I used this yesterday. So again, if one of you were to say, I think we need to plant more trees in the village of Wind Point, and another one of you says, think we need to cut down all the trees in Wind Point, you're putting me in a somewhat difficult position. Please don't. So if you vote on whether to cut down all the trees or add more trees, then it's the plan commission directing me through Travis, if that makes sense. If you have a question that you want to call and talk about, that's perfectly fine too. My availability is considerably higher via email during business hours and certainly after business hours. But if you want to talk, if you miss me, I'll certainly give you a call back. Unless it's about a certain property in the village I don't want to talk about anymore.
Yeah, we're not talking about that.
How would you actually distribute the survey here?
It sounded like electronic,
By email.
by email.
And hard copy at the office.
Yeah,
I mean, I can, I don't want to, I've taken so much of your time. I can show you what a survey looks like, a recent one, if you want to see one quick. Or you can just wait until you see the draft. It's up to you.
Population that actually responds to surveys.
you know, I remember filling a survey out for the first plan, but I kind of want to say it's paper. I can't remember. But I have no idea. I mean, honestly, I think you're lucky if you get a 10% response. But I could be wrong. You tell me.
See, you're kind of brilliant. 10% is fantastic.
Yeah.
You get 10% and we're happy. You get 25% and we're overjoyed. The thing is, if you get more than 25%, that's great. It doesn't provide any benefit other than to say, we got 40%. The magic number is 10. If you get 10% of the population, so long as it's a relatively random selection of the population, random distribution, if you will, all the information is valid. If you get 20 to 25%, it just locks in that margin of error. Less than 10% absolutely is workable. 7% is the number where if you get less than 7%, sometimes we say maybe we should send postcards to everybody, let them know. And again, once you eclipse 25, there's no tangible benefit to the increased responses. So 10% would be perfectly acceptable.
That would be the people that are really engaged.
That's the selection bias situation, right? When you send out a survey, it's about what people do for work, whether they're engaged in the public, how they feel about, there's the population distribution issue as well. Generally, survey responses skew towards the upper end of the age continuum and not so much on the lower end. There are ways to get around that, but it'll be relatively predictable. I mean, I would bet you're going to have somewhere between 8 and 11% survey response. I no longer ask questions about gender or age because people tend to think that even though we say they're anonymous, people suspect sometimes that they're not. So I just stopped doing that. But if we did do that, or when I did do that, the median age for survey responses was typically high 40s to mid 50s. And that would be in a community with a relatively standard deviation of population. Wind Point skews a little bit older historically. And again, as I understand it, it's getting a little bit younger. But I would suspect you'd be somewhere in that 50, 55, approaching 60 range for the bulk of the responses, 40 to 50% of the responses. And then the rest would be kind of standard deviation stuff.
send out by an email or just on the website or?
Options are on.
How's our response as far as getting people signed up with the new website? Good. So,
I don't,
I was just curious. I tried signing up and like, I'm having a problem, so I'll have to.
Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah,
Uh,
So this is my most recent at City of Wyawega in Wapaka County, completed about a year ago. And this one is relatively brief. They didn't really need more than this. So I'll just scroll slowly. You can kind of see some of the questions. You'll notice I want to know a little bit about the people, but I don't need to know their age or gender, marital status, or any of that stuff. I want to know,
enlarge it a little bit.
I'll do my best here.
That's helpful, thank you.
Very welcome. I want to know how long you've been there. You know, are you a new resident of the Village of Wind Point, or have you been in Wind Point for more than 20 years? That's important to know. If you've been there 20 years and you're complaining about stuff, that tells me something. If you're brand new and you're complaining about stuff, that also tells me something. So just stop me if you see anything you want to talk about, but I'll just scroll through slowly so you can see. And I would suspect your survey would be not dissimilar from this. The questions won't be exactly the same because again, Wyawega and Wind Point are not the same other than both start with W, both on water. The water is a little bit different in Wyawega. They're on the Wapaka chain of lakes, but a little bit different community. And as I mentioned earlier, here's the question pertaining to the types of housing,
Mhm.
transportation, recreational amenities. Now in Wind Point, if we do the recreation thing, this would be much, much more brief because again, we're going to update the outdoor recreation plan and we'll be gathering specific information in that. And that information will almost certainly be available before we get to this part of the comp plan. So we'd be able to take information from there and plug it in, which is another reason we can reduce some of the costs in some of the chapter sections. I suppose if I was smart, I would have showed you the tabulated responses. You'd see the survey and you'd see how they actually responded to them. You can see that if you'd like. Getting very close to the end right now. And then here's that, some version of this question I'd like to include because it just gives people a chance to write something out. They're not checking a box, yes or no, or I like or dislike. They're able to express their opinion. What I found is you really, really have to make it clear that only one, because what'll end up is I'll get a paragraph or a couple of pages and like, how do I summarize that for
I was gonna ask you how many people do only give you one thing.
Hey, Jeff,
more than used to before I said specifically one thing. Yes, go ahead, please.
and is this survey tied to the draft plan? Is pretty much what you're geared towards?
Correct. So on the survey community, where is it? Bottom of page 6 of the proposal where it says community survey, that would be this thing. And it would guide the development of the plan itself.
All right, I think, are we good?
We're good?
We're good. Thank you again, Jeff, and I'm
Thanks,
sure I'll be
Jeff.
seeing you again soon.
Yeah, I think you're probably cursed with that. Sorry about it.
Jeff, the public thanks you also.
You'll have to come down here.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you.
Um,
All right. Well, on that note, I'll bid you adieu and I'll go say hi to my family.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Nice, you too.
We want to try and set up our next meeting.
that would be around Jeff's availability, so I'll let you know when Jeff's.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I won't try to send.
But what is part of the meeting?
Pardon me? for what it's
I
worth.
was gonna say something that's not part of the meeting, it was just a comment. So if you need to dismiss the meeting.
Okay, referrals, we all have our homework to check out the Racine
Yeah.
ordinances, short-term rental ordinances. And think about the kind of questions for the survey. First survey they did. The first survey, I mean, because from the, he's gonna send back on the fee structure on the plan and see if that's what we want to do. And we'll set up a meeting based on his, we will hear from Mr. Travis on that. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to.
Second? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion, the meeting is adjourned at 7:25.
So now I'll say.